The Boy Who Asked the Wrong King for Help *. The grand ballroom of the Crescent Royal Hotel glittered with wealth, music, and laughter, but none of it interested King Lucian Vale. He stood near the towering windows, watching the lights of the city spread across the darkness like scattered stars. The humans around him believed he was simply another powerful billionaire, hosting a charity gala for hospitals and orphanages. They did not know the truth that behind the calm, elegant smile was the ancient ruler of the vampire world, a king who had walked the earth for more than 4 centuries. Lucian hated these gatherings. Humans pretending to care about kindness while secretly competing for power and influence always left a bitter taste in his mind. Still, a king had responsibilities, and tonight he had chosen to appear among them. Crystal glasses clinked softly as wealthy guests laughed and traded secrets. Music drifted through the air from a small orchestra in the corner, filling the hall with soft violin notes. Lucian remained silent, his crimson eyes studying the room carefully. He had long ago learned how to read humans. Greed had a scent. Fear had a rhythm. Lies had a certain tone in the voice. Tonight the ballroom was filled with all three. But suddenly something unexpected interrupted his thoughts. A small tug at the edge of his black coat. Lucian looked down. A little boy stood beside him, no older than 5 or 6. His curly brown hair was messy, and his expensive little suit looked as if it had been put on in a hurry. Tears had dried on his cheeks, leaving pale streaks on his face. The child's wide eyes stared up at Lucian with desperate hope. Most children instinctively avoided Lucian without knowing why. Even in human disguise, something about him whispered danger. But this boy had walked directly to him. "Sir," the boy whispered nervously. Lucian slowly knelt so they were at the same height. The noise of the ballroom faded around them as his attention focused entirely on the trembling child. "What is it?" Lucian asked gently. The boy swallowed, gripping Lucian's coat tighter. "My mommy. She's crying in the bathroom." Lucian's ancient heart grew suddenly cold. Children rarely misunderstood fear. "Why is she crying?" Lucian asked quietly. The boy's small voice shook as he answered. "She told me to stay outside, but she won't come out. She told me to find someone who looks strong, someone who isn't scared." Lucian studied the boy's face carefully. The fear in his eyes was real. His senses sharpened instantly, and beneath the noise of the party, he listened more closely. Vampires possessed hearing far beyond human ability, and after a moment he heard it a faint, shaky breathing echoing from down the quiet hallway leading to the restrooms. Someone was crying, not the soft crying of sadness, but the controlled, terrified breathing of someone hiding from danger. Lucian stood slowly. "What's your name?" he asked. "Noah," the boy replied. Lucian nodded once. "Show me." The two of them walked through the crowded ballroom together. Guests barely noticed them passing by, too busy laughing and discussing business deals worth millions. To them it was just a powerful host escorting a lost child. But Lucian's instincts were now fully awake. And the deeper they moved into the quiet corridor, the clearer the sound of frightened breathing became. Noah stopped outside the women's restroom door. "She's in there," he whispered. Lucian placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Wait here for a moment." The child nodded nervously. Lucian pushed the restroom door open and stepped inside. The room was silent except for the faint drip of a faucet and the soft echo of someone breathing behind the final stall door. He walked slowly toward it. "I'm not here to hurt you," Lucian said calmly. "Your son asked me to help." The breathing behind the door suddenly stopped. For several seconds there was complete silence. Then a soft, broken voice answered from inside. "Please, just go away." Lucian's eyes darkened. "I can't," he replied quietly. "Because I made a promise to your son." The stall door remained closed. But behind it, The frightened woman whispered something that made even the ancient vampire king go still. My husband is here, and if he finds me, he might kill me. Lucian's expression slowly hardened, because in that moment he realized something important. Tonight, someone in this building had just made the worst mistake of their life. They had frightened a mother while their child was watching. The stall door opened, just enough for the frightened woman to step out slowly, as if every movement might trigger disaster. Elena Hart looked like she belonged among the wealthy guests in the ballroom outside. Her dark blue dress was elegant, her hair carefully tied back, and delicate jewelry shimmered under the white bathroom lights. To anyone at the gala, she would appear perfectly composed, just another beautiful guest enjoying the evening. But Lucian saw the truth immediately. Vampires could read the smallest signs of pain, and Elena carried them everywhere. Her hands trembled as she held them tightly together. A faint bruise darkened the edge of her jaw, beneath carefully applied makeup. Most of all, her eyes told the real story. They were exhausted, frightened, and used to hiding their fear. She looked at Lucian cautiously, clearly unsure if she had made a terrible mistake by opening the door. My son shouldn't have bothered you, she whispered, her voice shaking despite her effort to stay calm. He didn't bother me, Lucian replied quietly. He asked for help. Elena's eyes immediately filled with guilt. I told him to stay outside. I didn't want him to see this. Lucian nodded slightly. He's waiting for you. For a moment, Elena looked toward the restroom entrance, as if she desperately wanted to run to her son. But fear stopped her feet from moving. Is he still alone? She asked quickly. Yes, Lucian answered. And he's very brave. The compliment caused something fragile to break inside her expression, and for a moment she closed her eyes as if trying to keep herself from crying again. When she spoke next, her voice was barely louder than a whisper. You don't understand. If my husband sees me with you, it will only make things worse. Lucian's eyes darkened slightly. What is his name? Elena hesitated, her breathing growing tense again. She glanced nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst inside at any second. Finally, she answered, Victor Howell. The name hung in the air for a moment. Lucian recognized it instantly. Victor Howell was a powerful businessman, known for controlling half the city's construction industry. Publicly, he was respected, admired, even feared in business circles. But rumors followed him everywhere, rumors of corruption, threats, and violence hidden behind polished suits and charming smiles. Lucian studied Elena carefully. He did this to you, Lucian said calmly, gesturing slightly toward the bruise. Elena instinctively raised her hand to cover her jaw. It was an accident, she replied quickly, the automatic lie of someone used to protecting their abuser. Lucian said nothing for a moment. After centuries of watching humans, he knew exactly what that sentence meant. Elena finally looked up at him again. Please, just forget you saw anything, she said softly. I'll take Noah and leave. If Victor thinks I embarrassed him tonight, it could be very bad. Lucian's expression remained calm, but inside him something ancient and dangerous was beginning to stir. For 400 years he had ruled the hidden vampire world beneath the human one. He had seen wars, betrayals, and terrible cruelty. Yet there was one thing he despised more than anything else: men who believed power gave them the right to hurt the weak. Elena, Lucian said quietly. She froze slightly at the sound of her name. Your son asked me to protect you. Her voice cracked again. You can't protect me from him. Lucian slowly turned toward the restroom door. You'd be surprised, he replied. Then he opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Noah immediately looked up with hopeful eyes, but before Lucian could speak, another voice echoed from the end of the corridor. A man's angry footsteps approached rapidly, followed by a sharp, furious shout. Elena, Where the hell are you?" Elena's face instantly turned pale with fear. And the moment Lucian saw the terror in her eyes, the ancient vampire king made a silent decision. Tonight, Victor Hawley was about to discover that some men were far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Victor Hale's furious footsteps echoed through the quiet corridor, his expensive shoes striking the marble floor like thunder. The anger in his voice had already drawn attention from a few curious guests near the ballroom entrance. But Victor didn't care who heard him. When Victor Hawley was angry, the world usually stepped aside. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an expensive tailored suit, he carried the kind of confidence that came from years of power and influence. People feared him because he owned companies, buildings, and entire careers. If someone embarrassed him publicly, they often disappeared from the business world within weeks. Tonight, however, his anger was directed at someone he believed he completely owned: his wife, Elena. He shouted again as he reached the restroom hallway. The moment his eyes landed on her standing near the door, his expression twisted with cold fury. Elena froze instantly, her body reacting with the silent fear of someone who had lived with that anger for far too long. Noah instinctively moved closer to his mother, gripping the edge of her dress. Victor's sharp gaze then shifted toward the man standing beside them. Lucian Vale stood perfectly still, calm and composed, his dark suit and quiet posture making him appear like nothing more than another wealthy guest. But there was something about his presence that made the air feel heavier. Victor narrowed his eyes. "And who exactly are you?" he demanded sharply. Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly stepped forward so that Elena and Noah were now standing slightly behind him. The movement was subtle, but unmistakably protective. Victor noticed it instantly, and his expression darkened. "Step aside," Victor said coldly. "This is a private matter between me and my wife." Elena's hands trembled again, but Lucian remained calm. "Your son asked for help," Lucian said quietly. Victor laughed harshly. "My son?" He scoffed. "That boy should learn to mind his own business." Noah shrank slightly at the sound of Victor's voice, and the small movement did not escape Lucien's notice. For a brief moment, Lucian's crimson eyes flickered with something ancient and dangerous. "Children usually know when something is wrong," Lucian replied calmly. Victor stepped closer, clearly irritated now. "Listen carefully," he said in a threatening voice. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're interfering in something that doesn't concern you." Lucian's gaze met Victor's without fear. In fact, there was something strangely calm about his expression that only seemed to anger Victor more. "You're right," Lucian said slowly. "Normally it wouldn't concern me." Victor smirked slightly, believing he had already won the argument. But Lucien's next sentence made the smirk vanish instantly. "However, I have a rule," Lucian continued calmly. "No one harms innocent people inside my territory." Victor blinked in confusion. "Your territory?" he repeated with a mocking laugh. "You must be new in this city if you think you have territory here." Lucian tilted his head slightly, studying the man standing in front of him like a predator observing something foolish. Then he said 4 simple words that changed everything. "I own this building." The hallway suddenly went silent. Victor's expression shifted as realization slowly began to appear. Lucian Vale was not just another wealthy guest. He was the mysterious billionaire who owned the entire Crescent Tower, one of the most powerful and untouchable figures in the city. But even that truth was only a fraction of the real power standing in front of him. Victor's anger slowly returned, this time mixed with arrogance. "Even if you own the building," Victor said coldly, "that doesn't give you the right to interfere in my marriage." Lucian's expression darkened slightly. "You're correct," he said quietly. "Your marriage is not my concern." Then his voice became colder than winter. "But hurting people under my protection is." Victor scoffed. Protection? He repeated mockingly. From what exactly? Lucian looked at Elena and Noah standing behind him. Then he looked back at Victor Hall. For the first time in the entire conversation, Lucian smiled slightly. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a king who had finally decided to stop pretending to be human. And in that moment, Victor Halle unknowingly crossed the worst possible line. Because the powerful businessman believed he was facing another rich man. What he did not realize was that he was standing in front of the ancient ruler of the vampire world. The hallway remained silent for several long seconds after Lucian's chilling smile appeared. Victor Hall stared at him with growing irritation, clearly struggling to understand why the calm man standing in front of him was not backing down. Most people avoided conflict with Victor. His wealth, influence, and reputation for destroying anyone who crossed him had built a shield around his arrogance. But Lucian Vale did not move. He stood there like an immovable wall, his presence calm yet strangely intimidating. Elena could feel the tension rising in the air like a coming storm. She instinctively held Noah closer, her hand gently resting on her son's head, as if trying to shield him from what might happen next. Victor's patience finally snapped. "Move," he said sharply, stepping forward and reaching for Elena's arm. The moment his hand extended toward her, Lucian moved faster than any human eye could properly follow. 1 second Victor's hand was reaching forward, and the next second Lucian's fingers had closed around his wrist like iron chains. Victor froze in shock. Lucian's grip was not painful, but it was impossibly strong. Victor tried to pull his hand away, but it would not move even an inch. Confusion flashed across his face. "Let go of me," Victor demanded angrily. Lucian's crimson eyes slowly darkened as he looked directly into Victor's face. For the first time, Victor felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest fear. "You should not touch people who are afraid of you," Lucian said quietly. His voice was calm, but the cold authority within it made the words feel heavier than a threat. Victor tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out weaker than he expected. "You think you're some kind of hero?" He scoffed. "She's my wife." Lucian tilted his head slightly. "A wife is not property." The sentence was spoken so simply that Victor didn't know how to respond. For a moment, the two men stared at each other in silence. Elena noticed something strange then. The lights in the hallway seemed slightly dimmer around Lucian, as if the shadows themselves were leaning closer to him. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice, but it made the atmosphere feel colder. Victor suddenly felt the temperature shift as well. A shiver ran down his spine despite the warm building. "What the hell are you?" Victor muttered, half joking, half uneasy. Lucian slowly released his wrist. Victor immediately stepped back, rubbing his arm where the iron grip had been. "You asked earlier what protection means," Lucian said calmly. "Let me explain." He turned slightly toward Elena and Noah. His voice softened noticeably when he spoke to them. "You're safe," he said gently. Noah looked up at him with wide eyes. The boy didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could sense that the tall man in the dark suit was on their side. Then Lucian looked back at Victor Hall, and the softness vanished instantly. His expression became cold again, ancient and unreadable. "Victor Hall," Lucian continued quietly, "you have built your life by intimidating people weaker than you." Victor tried to interrupt, but Lucian raised one hand slightly. The simple gesture somehow silenced him. "That method works well in the human world," Lucian continued. "But you have made a mistake tonight." Victor frowned. "And what mistake is that?" he asked angrily. Lucian's eyes glowed faintly crimson for just a brief moment, so quickly that Victor almost thought he imagined it. "You frightened a mother while her child was watching," Lucian said calmly. The words sent a strange chill through the hallway. Elena felt it too. It was not just anger in Lucian's voice anymore. It was something older, something protective and territorial. Victor tried to hide his growing discomfort with another arrogant laugh. "You're being dramatic," he said. "This is a family matter." Lucian took one slow step forward. "No," he replied quietly. It stopped being a family matter the moment fear entered this hallway. Victor suddenly realized something terrifying. This man was not bluffing. And for the first time in his powerful life, Victor Halle had absolutely no idea how dangerous the person in front of him truly was. Victor Hall tried to steady his breathing as he stared at Lucian Vale. The strange coldness surrounding the man was beginning to make him uneasy, and Victor hated feeling uneasy. His entire life had been built on control. Employees obeyed him. Business rivals feared him. Even Elena had spent years shrinking under his anger. Yet now something about the quiet man in front of him made Victor feel like the situation had slipped beyond his command. Still, pride forced him to stand his ground. "You're making a mistake," Victor said sharply, straightening his jacket as if reclaiming authority. "You think you're protecting her, but you don't know anything about our life." Lucian's expression remained calm, almost emotionless, but there was a dangerous stillness behind his eyes. "I know enough," Lucian replied quietly. Victor scoffed again, though the sound lacked the confidence it had earlier. "You see one bruise, and suddenly you think you understand everything." Elena flinched at the harsh tone, and Noah tightened his grip on her dress. Lucian noticed both reactions immediately. His patience, which had been thin already, began to disappear completely. "Fear leaves patterns," Lucian said slowly, "and your wife carries far too many of them." Victor rolled his eyes. "She's dramatic," he muttered dismissively. "You'd be surprised what women will do for attention." Elena looked down at the floor, clearly used to hearing words like that. But Lucian's eyes darkened instantly. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop again, and even Victor felt it this time. "Careful," Lucian said quietly. The single word carried more warning than a shouted threat. Victor's jaw tightened. "Or what?" he challenged. Lucian took another slow step forward. The distance between the two men closed, and suddenly Victor realized something disturbing. Lucian wasn't angry in the way humans became angry. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures. Instead, there was something far colder and more controlled, like a predator deciding whether something in front of it was worth destroying. "Or you will learn," Lucian replied calmly, "that power built on fear is fragile." Victor laughed again, but it sounded forced. "You talk like some kind of king," he said mockingly. For the first time since the confrontation began, Lucian answered honestly. "I am?" Victor blinked in confusion, unsure whether the statement was arrogance or a joke. But Elena noticed something different. The shadows along the hallway walls seemed deeper now, stretching subtly toward Lucian, as if drawn by his presence. Noah also stared at Lucian with wide curiosity rather than fear, as if children could somehow sense the truth adults missed. Victor shook his head impatiently. "Enough of this nonsense," he snapped. "Elena, we're leaving." He reached toward her again, but this time Lucian stepped forward before his hand could get close. The movement was so fast, Victor barely saw it happen. Lucian didn't grab him this time. He simply stood there between Victor and Elena, his posture calm yet absolutely immovable. "No," Lucian said quietly. The single word carried the weight of authority that had ruled kingdoms for centuries. Victor stared at him in disbelief. "You think you can stop me?" he asked angrily. Lucian's gaze did not waver. "Yes." Victor's anger finally exploded. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he shouted. Lucian's expression hardened slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had watched empires rise and fall. "Actually," Lucian said calmly, I know exactly who you are." Victor waited for him to continue. Lucian looked briefly toward Elena and Noah standing behind him. Then he looked back at Victor Hall with eyes that no longer tried to hide their ancient power. "You are a man who mistakes cruelty for strength," Lucian said slowly. "And tonight, that mistake ends." Victor suddenly felt something terrifying settle into his chest. For the first time in years, he realized he might not be the most powerful person in the room. Victor Hall stood frozen as Lucian Vale's calm words echoed in the hallway. The confidence that had carried him through decades of intimidation was slowly crumbling under the quiet authority of the man standing in front of him. For the first time in years, Victor didn't know what to say. His usual threats suddenly felt weak, almost childish. He glanced briefly at Elena and Noah behind Lucian, expecting to see fear in their faces. Elena still looked nervous, but something had changed in her expression. The hopelessness that had once filled her eyes was slowly being replaced by something fragile but powerful hope. Noah held tightly to his mother's hand, staring up at Lucian with the kind of trust children only give to someone they feel safe around. Victor noticed that look, and it made his anger flare again. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, trying to reclaim control. "You think standing there like some self-righteous hero is going to change anything?" Lucian didn't react to the insult. Instead, he simply watched Victor carefully, like a judge silently measuring someone's actions. "Your life could be very comfortable, Victor," Lucian said quietly. "You have wealth, influence, and opportunity. Yet you chose cruelty." Victor laughed bitterly. "Cruelty?" he repeated. "You don't understand how the world works. Power means control." Lucian shook his head slightly. "No," he replied calmly. "Power means responsibility." The difference between the two men could not have been clearer. Victor had spent his life using power to dominate others, while Lucian carried the weight of centuries protecting those who could not protect themselves. Elena watched the exchange in silence, her heart racing. She still didn't fully understand who Lucian truly was, but something about him made her feel safer than she had in years. Victor's patience finally broke again. "Enough," he snapped angrily. "Elena, come here." Elena didn't move. For the first time since their marriage began, she stayed exactly where she was. Victor's eyes widened in disbelief. "Elena," he said more sharply. Still she didn't move. Slowly she shook her head. The small gesture felt like the breaking of invisible chains. Victor stared at her as if she had betrayed him. "You think this stranger will protect you forever?" he said harshly. Elena looked toward Lucian briefly, then back at Victor. Her voice was quiet, but steady when she answered. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said softly, "but I know I don't want to live in fear anymore." The words hung in the air like a declaration of freedom. Victor's face twisted with anger, but before he could respond, Lucian stepped forward again. "You should leave now," Lucian said calmly. Victor looked ready to argue again, but something in Lucian's gaze stopped him. The faint crimson glow returned to Lucian's eyes for just a moment, and a deep, instinctive fear passed through Victor's body. Every survival instinct in him suddenly screamed the same warning. This man was not someone he wanted as an enemy. Victor took a slow step backward, then another. For the first time since entering the hallway, he said nothing. He simply turned and walked away toward the ballroom, his footsteps no longer confident but hurried. Silence returned to the hallway. Elena exhaled slowly, her body shaking with relief. Noah looked up at Lucian with wide admiration. "You're really strong," the boy said innocently. Lucian looked down at him and for the first time that night smiled warmly. "Your mother is stronger," he replied. Elena blinked in surprise. "Me?" she asked softly. Lucian nodded. "Walking away from fear is the bravest thing anyone can do." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Noah tugged gently on Lucian's coat again. "Thank you for helping my mommy," he said. Lucian looked down at the boy thoughtfully. "You helped her," Lucian replied. "You were brave enough to ask." Elena's eyes filled with quiet tears, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had finally stood beside her instead of against her. Lucian turned toward the ballroom again, then looked back at Elena. "If you ever need help again," he said calmly, "you know where to find me." And with that, the mysterious king of the night walked back toward the crowd, leaving behind a mother and child whose lives had just changed forever.